You're watching Faith and Reason, a discussion about God, politics, and pop culture. From the perspective of our pastors, who are not afraid to tackle and ask the hard questions. A Christian talk show for those on a spiritual journey. This is Faith and Reason.
Good evening. Welcome to Faith and Reason, a show that looks at issues that are going on in Tay Society in light of the Word of God. I'm Pastor George Crespo of First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park. With me, as always, our co-host, Pastor Rick Spence from Fort Lee Gospel.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Here we are in February, and we're soon nearing St. Valentine's Day, the Day of Lovers. Mm-hmm. And so we thought we'd dedicate a show to, talking a little bit about the background concerning Valentine itself, the holiday, and also what the Bible says about love and romance and what's applicable and not applicable. Mm-hmm. And so let's begin, first of all, by dealing with this whole question of where does Valentine's Day come from?
Well, I was digging in a little bit. There is a Saint Valentine, which we often call Saint Valentine's Day, that was developed by the 5th century. Maybe a little bit earlier than that, but even before the Christian version of Valentine's Day, there was some Roman pagan celebration, different around the same time of year. There's some idea of boys meeting girls and some traditions which are pre-Christian, but it seems that when the Roman Empire became Christian, that's the 4th century. They took three different martyrs were named Valentinus, and those martyrs were given a day on the calendar, which came to be February 14th. So it's really, we have to say there is Christian roots for the most part how we celebrate Valentine's Day, even though sometimes you wouldn't know it. People don't associate Valentine's Day with going to church or religion, and yet the roots really start there. So
how did it develop then from a martyrs of the church and Christian holiday to today, where it's really about roses and flowers and candy and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the development is, through the Middle Ages, there were certain ideas picked up, the Cupid ideas, things like that. And then coming to America, it just seemed to be something that gained traction. Actually, a funny story I read was that in Japan they developed a Valentine's Day tradition, and this is me reading. I didn't talk to a real Japanese person to learn this, but just reading on the internet, they say that first of all, pre-World War II, there was an idea of Valentine's Day imported from America, and then in the 1950s, it became a tradition that women would buy chocolates for their male co-workers, and when they looked at it more carefully, they realized that it was a mistranslation of a Valentine's idea that women would have to buy, because a lot of times, in our tradition, it's a little bit more on the men's side. Yes. Men spend the money, and so there's different traditions in different parts of the world, and there are other, lovers' traditions on different days and different cultures, but for the most part, the Christian history in the Western Church of Valentine's Day developed into what we know today with the romance and the love and the couples and all of that.
So anything else about the actual person, Valentine? Or you said there were three individuals?
Yeah, there's three different martyrs, and martyrs meaning that they died for their faith. Yes. They were executed. I mean, you know that, but just for clarity, I know okay. I can't assume everybody
knows
thinks
what
that
a martyr
way.
Is, yeah.
But so three different Valentinus, a fairly common Roman name in the early centuries. There was some we know a little bit about. And really to understand them, one was a bishop in Italy, and he seemed to have died around 270 or so. The tradition goes, that's probably the most prominent of the three. The one died in North Africa, and they know very little about his death and circumstances, and so the church actually gathered in the late 400s. They came up with this idea that there needs to be a day on the church calendar to remember Saint Valentine. And so that's what leads us into all the myths and the stories. Which are
Any other legends that are connected with that? Because that's I find it incredible that they would jump from, we see how the Santa Claus thing developed.
Right.
But to think of Valentine, I mean, the guy's a martyr. The guy's being killed. I mean, I just don't see the romance and.
Right. Well, that's where you need to hear the myth. That's where,
amazing.
That's where the
That's
tie
amazing
comes.
That people. I mean.
Yeah.
And I know that within, of course, the Catholic calendar, every day has almost significance because they always dedicate to one thing or another. But it's interesting they would do this, but how that would come, that's an interesting Genesis story to find out how that whole thing developed, because that's really weird that from people being killed and connected to the Christian faith and church service to, chocolates. I mean, so it actually went from being Christian to being pagan completely. So
that's true. Well, let me throw in a couple of the stories then, and this kind of before we get into the Bible, and we'll get there. But some of the better known myths associated with Valentine is one in particular had Valentine as a bishop during a time when. And this is, matter of fact, let me preface this story by saying it's almost certainly not true. This is one of those things that historians dig a little bit. They say, that doesn't line up. The other ones may be more factual, but this one doesn't. It says that the Roman emperor was concerned about his soldiers being distracted with marriage, so he banned marriage for all his soldiers. And so Valentine, the bishop, went against the ban, and he was marrying soldiers and doing weddings, even though it was illegal, and that got him thrown in prison and gave him a death sentence. That's one story, and when historians look at that, and again, it's without being a scholar or looking into it carefully enough, but a little bit of looking into it, they say, well, the same Roman emperor is known for encouraging these same soldiers to take women from the spoils of their conquest. So they conquer an area and they take 2 or 3 wives. So they say that doesn't sound quite right. So there's and history would show there was a ban against marriage, and that wasn't true. So that's one of those kind of myths that develop. You say, okay, well we'll make him a romance, somebody who does weddings, and so that was the first part of it. A more credible story, which has been repeated often, it goes back to, I think, early tellings of it. We have it recorded in the 4th, 5th century, around that time, and it's been repeated in later writings, was that Valentinus was imprisoned for being a minister, for sharing his faith, for promoting the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when he was in prison, the jailer took a liking to him because he was an educated man, and the jailer had a blind daughter. So the blind daughter was able to spend a lot of time with his jailer. And a quick note is that the year is 270 A.D. And of course, part of it, which may not be factual, they say that he actually died on February 14th of 270. That may be the wrong date, but the story has some validity. So there seemed to be a romance that developed between the priest and this young girl who was blind, and understand that priests in those times were not banned from marriage. So this was not an immoral relationship, but there was a liking taking. And he taught this blind girl about faith in Jesus, and she became a Christian. She became a follower of Christ, and he's teaching her the Gospels and the healings. And she said, well, could God heal me? So he prayed for her healing. She received her sight. That's certainly something well within the history of Christianity. There's plenty of healings documented throughout the history of Christianity. And so because of her healing, there was a conversion of her whole family. and yet with that healing did not stop the execution. He still died. A part of the legend, I'll call this more the legend side, is that his last note to his loved this young girl was, keep the faith, and he signed it, from your Valentine. And so that picked up. I mean, that sounds more Hallmark, than history. But regardless, the fact is, I lean towards believing that there was a healing, there was a martyrdom, there was a relationship, a love relationship in prison that developed, and yet I wouldn't stake my reputation on it, but I tend to believe that there's some fact to that.
Well, we see that, of course, we have this legend development, of course, and it's connected to the Christian church and Christian faith. So maybe in light of that, it's a good time to make a bridge over into the Bible and what we know more about. And obviously, it is a time of love and romance and whatnot. And what does the Bible say about, or does it say anything much about romance?
Well, I think it says quite a bit, and I would even add, let me start with this, is that our modern sense of romance was not a given in the ancient world. The idea that a man and woman would fall in love and get married is not necessarily a concept that every culture used. It was almost, frequently marriage in the ancient world was more of a partnership, more of a and often male-dominated. Women were subjected to very much second-class citizenship. And so in light of those realities of the ancient world, there are multiple love stories that develop. And certainly, and we could do 3 shows on this topic, but it really begins in the Garden of Eden. It says, it was not good that Adam was alone, and so God provided Eve. Eve was created to be his partner, and that sense of a helpmate, a supporter, working together, and so that's and of course there's all kinds of theology that comes out of that. But the concept in Genesis account is that God officiated the first wedding. He says, it's not good that a man would be alone. He brought a woman to be with man. They were married, they were husband and wife, and they lived in this perfect garden before sin, before there was evil in the world. So you see that beginning as the start of it, and then Song of Solomon. You've got different love stories in the the relationship of the patriarchs, some of it dysfunctional, some of it, definitely. But, again, we should probably, and jump in here if you want, there's multiple themes, of love that we see in the stories of the Bible and the relationships that come up in the Old Testament.
Well, we're going to do that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue this theme about romance in the Bible. Opposed to that. We would imagine that if it was arranged in marriage, there couldn't really be love, there really couldn't be romance. How does all that fit in today? I mean, we have such a different way of going about marriage than they did in the ancient world.
Yeah, well, you're asking the question from an American perspective, because there are plenty of places in this world where there still are arranged marriages, and they're to put the best face on it, and I guess I've known more people. I had an assistant pastor from India, and I've had a number of members who are originally from India. In that culture, frequently marriage is something which is not an individualistic decision. It's a family decision. So the family, almost negotiates with another family, and to say it's arranged marriages has a whole spectrum, and in some cases it may even be one person saying, I like that person, we're becoming friends, I'd like to marry them, and then the family get involved and they negotiate and they arrange for the marriage. So not all arranged marriages are the same, and yet in the ancient world, listen, there was plenty of unhealthy versions of marriage which were a lot worse than arranged. There was it was a more collective society. The ancient world is more similar to India is today than it is to America today, and yet within that, you think about in the ancient world, rich people would just collect wives, and they have multiple wives, and that would be common. So much so that when Muhammad had his dozen wives or whatever he had, he made it a law that a good Muslim can have up to 4 wives. And that's coming out of that ancient world mentality, trying to corral it, because polygamy is very destructive. An old guy who's got money keeps collecting these young wives, and the young men don't have money. They can't get married. They can't, have peers to marry. So the options are a lot worse. And even though sometimes there are elements of polygamy that we read about in the Bible which are uncomfortable for our modern ethics, and yet certainly much of Scripture is bringing us to a healthier place in terms of relationship.
I don't have the same objection to
polygamy.
To polygamy.
Okay.
No, not because.
And how many wives do you have?
No, you can only have one wife.
Okay.
You have mistresses, no concubines, no.
Please.
All kidding aside, no, because I think if there was a real adverse thing to it, I think God would have been much more pronounced against it. But it's way too obvious in the Old Testament. I think that it is our ethics in our times that seeks to impose an ethic upon the Old Testament that isn't there. Certain individuals are never condemned for having multiple wives.
That's true.
Like Solomon, who has 300 wives, 700 concubines, something like that.
Other way around.
His condemnation comes from the fact that he worships their gods, not the fact that he has them. It's almost like God understands that within that world system, this is what happens for a king who has a lot of marriages due to alliances. It has nothing to do with romance, whatever has to do with alliances, political alliances, and therefore this occurs. It was understandable when Abraham had a concubine. It was not, again, the fault with Abraham was that he did not trust God for the promise that God had made to him as to how it was going to come.
Right.
Not that he had a concubine. Obviously, God never said, no, get rid of them because I'm against polygamy. So I think it is an imposition from us back into the Old Testament, back into the Bible that isn't there, and doesn't seem to be. I mean, I just don't feel it's a diehard issue with God. So
Right,
I'm not saying we should reinstitute polygamy.
No,
I can see we see things that are destructive about it.
Right.
But we know that whether there is polygamy or not, it is destructive. When we were talking about the arranged marriages, one of the things that came up in medieval times was the thing called courtly love, that they would be married, and since their marriage was arranged, they would have this kind of relationship outside of their marriage where that was their love, almost like Lancelot and Guinevere type mentality, where it was, it's not his wife, but he does everything for her. He fights battles for her. He does everything in her honor. It's like that kind of thing. And we see that in our society where people, they're married and they're going outside of marriage to get the romance that apparently they had at one time, they can't find anymore, so they go outside their marriage. So either way, I think the destruction is always there. If you're not a healthy human being, if you don't have healthy relationships, if you're not a healthy person yourself, there's going to be destruction, whether in the Old Testament with polygamy or today with monogamy.
Right. No, I mean, I agree with that point. I would only clarify, is that all polygamy in the Bible is in the Old Testament. In terms of when we come to New Testament ethics, there's, although some would argue that the leader must be the husband of but one wife, which is in the backdrop of the potential of polygamy. But as far as people, the issue in the New Testament is, are you going to be single like Jesus Christ and Paul was a single man, or are you going to be married and live as a
in the ancient world, it was very common within Roman society. Of course, the man was married, and the marriage was an arranged marriage, whether for status, for whatever it is you were trying to, when Julius Caesar got married, it was an arranged marriage to raise his status because he was not from that kind of society. He wanted to become part of society. Right. But then they would have mistresses. Yes. And actually, there was a third term. I can't remember the third term, but I think it was Plutarch who mentions you have your wife for this, for your children. You have your mistress for that, and then you have someone else for whatever. So they had these different affair type things. And so that was very common in the ancient world. So they had the one wife, and I'm not sure where polygamy became monogamy in the culture, but it was cultural to have one wife. but then they did these things
Right, right.
outside of marriage which were permissible.
And again, and even homosexuality is a part of that.
That was part of the same thing.
With the Roman culture.
Now, which comes from the Greek culture. And again, the reason they did that was because, again, it wasn't like, oh, let's just, let's have let's have contraceptive type stuff. They didn't. So men would not get married at a certain age. And so it was very common they instilled it within society this thing of having men with boys until they were ready to get married. And then once they got married, then they were supposed to stop the homosexual type relationship. So it wasn't seen as a romance type.
Right.
And there were people against it, like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, Socrates himself shunned it and did not get involved with that.
Right, right. But again, but to make the point, in the New Testament, there is an encouragement towards marriage and marriage to one person, being faithful to your spouse, and so really I guess I started, and then you picked up on it. I started with the idea that sometimes in the Old Testament, because you read about polygamy, you read about the Jewish kings with the multiple wives, and it makes us uncomfortable in our worldview and our perspective. Not you, but you don't care. But to say that our faith is teaching polygamy, as some Mormon sects have done, and the history of Mormonism,
it doesn't teach.
It doesn't teach that.
And you can tell but you're right. But by the New Testament, it becomes crystal clear that monogamy is it. This is what God desires. But yes, in the Old Testament, it was permissible.
Yes.
But again, I think it's because God works within the culture.
Right.
God permits things because as long as it's not blatant sin, He works with humanity where they are, not necessarily where they need to be. Yeah. But once the clarity comes in and says, well, this is it, then there's no issue there. One of the very well-known passages, 1 Corinthians 13. We have about 5 minutes. I want to focus on this. It's used a lot in marriages and stuff like that. You always hear it recited and stuff like that. What is 1 Corinthians 13 really all about? And how does it relate to romance and marriage and issues like that?
Well, the first thing is I would say that it has nothing to do with romance, but it gets applied to it just because we sometimes narrowly look at love only as something which is romantic, whereas Paul looked at love more in a sacrificial way, a giving love, a love that cared for others, and so. If I can read a little bit of it probably answers it better than me just to explain it. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but have not love, I gain nothing. And then this is the marriage passage. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And so really he's saying that if we can do all these spiritual things, godly things, but if we don't do it from a place of love, it amounts to nothing. So he's really talking about human relationship, and I think the first application out of this is the more we grow in the faith, the more we act as the Bible instructs us to live with ethics and morals, the better relationships will develop in time, because really sin is destructive to marriage and romance and healthy relationships. So in that realm, there's no guarantee, but the closer you get to God, the better your relationships become. The more you practice faith.
With that, because we're running out of time, I do want to bring this. The importance of faith.
Yeah.
And its impact to marriage and romance. Can you elaborate upon that? You're hitting upon it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm convinced that we, as Christians, should do romance better than anybody. Not because not because we're, these romantic types or because there's all types who are Christians, whether you're heady or emotional, but the fact is that God is love, and the best known verse in the Bible is, "For God so loved the world, He gave His only Son." And so again, there's a sense that God is love. We're called to love. We're to be known by our love. We're to know how we care for other people. And as we learn to love well, we end up being in a situation where we're better positioned to build healthy lives together with our families. And sometimes, I'll give you one example, Ozzy Osbourne, it's amazing to me that he's still married. How does a guy who is so associated with drugs, multiple evil things which may be more show than reality. Who knows what's behind closed doors? Yeah. But how is he still married? It's like a miracle.
Does he know that he's still married?
Does he know? Does he know what he's doing?
That's the important.
I use that as a point. But by the same token, the person who goes to church every week, the person who is a good person, a kind person, they have a better chance to have a lifelong marriage and grow old together.
Again, just because he's been married doesn't mean he's been a healthy marriage. And we don't know the history.
I'm using it as the exception. Yeah. That's why it's the shock of he's still married. That's the point.
Unfortunately, we need to wrap things up. But one thing, maybe we'll have to take a show and even continue this theme, because you touched upon the importance of God, and Ephesians 5 talks about the love of Christ to the church and compares marriage to that.
Yes.
And that is our model. That our love is to be a sacrificial love. Mm-hmm. We're running out of time, but we hope you do have a great Valentine's Day, and we pray that you'll come to understand the great love of Christ, and that it will flow into your marriage and into your lives. God bless you.
Thank you for watching Faith and Reason. Please join us again next week. We invite you to visit our pastors at one of their churches, Pastor Rick Spence at Fort Lee Gospel Church, or Pastor George Crespo at the First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park. Check out our websites for more information.